right, well, welcome to another episode of the High Grass. Sal, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. We're joined today by an outside guest. We have Matt Smorch of Country Mark with us. But before we get started, I want to go back and talk about the cooperative system as we try to do with every episode. And I want to address a book called Built of Men by a gentleman named I. Harvey Hull. And it's directed at our topic of discussion today as we have Country Mark in the room, and I'll let Matt introduce himself more formally. But I want to take an excerpt out of this book, and I think it's interesting to talk about how did we get to this, some of the stuff that we're going to talk about. We're going to jump ahead to 2021 here in just a minute, but as I look at this book, this stuck out to me. And it begins with one experience in the spring of 1928 illustrates this last point. V.L. Everson, a manager of the Montgomery County Farm Bureau Co-op, was developing the petroleum business in his territory. The general manager of the state cooperative was responsible for carrying on all the petroleum services in the state office. Everson, always a sharp buyer, eagerly bought 2 cars of kerosene when the state manager notified him that some was available at a bargain price. After receiving the first car, Everson called the state co-op and emphatic language canceled the shipment of the second car. Then he revealed that the kerosene of extremely low quality had been delivered just at a time when housewives were setting their chick incubators. At the time, most incubators were operated in the dining room of the home or a spare bedroom. When their houses filled with a foul-smelling kerosene smoke, the women of Montgomery County were frantic. On investigation, it was found that the kerosene was of very low viscosity and that the company was glad to get rid of it at any price. There was a strong temptation among some of the petroleum companies to unload bad goods on the young cooperatives. This, coupled with 2 other problems mentioned, and it made evident that the cooperative would never be entirely secure until it was in a position to manufacture its own petroleum fuels. About this time, oil fields were discovered in southwestern Indiana. The cooperative watched this development until it was satisfied there was enough crude oil in that territory to justify the installation of a refinery. Such a refinery was built in 1939 at Mount Vernon, Indiana. A barge and a towboat were bought to transport the products from Mount Vernon Refinery up the Ohio River to Aurora, Indiana, where a terminal storage plant was built. Numerous wells were drilled by the cooperative. Their own pipelines were laid to transport the crude oil from the wells to the refinery. The refined fuels were then picked up by barge or transport trucks and delivered to co-op bulk plants of Indiana. From the local bulk plant, the fuel is delivered to the farm in co-op trucks. Thus, petroleum has become the first completely integrated industry of the cooperative. In many cases, crude oil was pumped from under the farms of its co-op members. The crude oil was gathered, refined, and transported entirely in co-op facilities, a complete co-op system from producer to consumer. So bounce that ahead to 2021, and it's with great pleasure that we introduce you, Matt Smorch. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your position at Country Mark. How long you been there?
Okay. Well, I'm Matt Smorch. I'm the president and CEO of Country Mark. I have been with the company for over 20 years. I actually started down at the refinery and worked my way through operations and refinery manager, and then came up to Indianapolis sometime about 12, 13 years ago to do strategy, bounced around to do supply and strategy, did marketing for a while, went back and got back into operations before I was appointed president and CEO. I'm a refining guy by nature. I've been in the refining business my whole career. I've been in it for over 30 years, and I love our business and what we do.
So
go ahead.
Just being in operations, going back to the book, the Built of Men, and just imagine how hard it was to get some energy products, electricity or even fuel to heat homes. How hard it was back then, and it's amazing how far we have came and what those that came before us did.
It's interesting that the beginning of that chapter talks about how they were more interested in raising young colts and producing hay, and that whole transition chapter goes to what we just alluded to, and now with you sitting here. So.
Yeah, it is interesting the history of the company, because it started off as Indiana Farm Bureau Cooperative Inc. It became the profit center piece of the business, and operating as a cooperative it's really unique. And some of the things that I've read is that we've been part of trying to get electricity to rural Indiana, and going and doing, like you said, as far as getting quality fuels. You know, the great thing about that passage in there talking about quality, you know, Country Mark, that's one of our values, is that we're built on quality and providing quality fuel. So to be able to go and provide that all the time is important, especially when you get out to the countryside. I was just talking to a farmer here about a month ago, and you know, it's one of those things that's very gratifying to work for a company when a farmer says, this is the only fuel that I've ever put in my equipment. And he swears by it. And it's that's a great thing to be a part of.
So we've addressed your future, or I'm sorry, not your future. We're going to talk about the future. We've addressed your history. So tell us a little bit about your volume and how many people you employ, your physical locations. Give us a little insight into that.
Okay. Well, you know, as you said, Country Mark, we started the refinery. It started up in 1940, and it was only about 2,000 barrels a day. Today, we're processing about 33,000 barrels a day of crude. And our refinery is located down in Mount Vernon, which is west of Evansville, Indiana. We have, when I look at our refinery, we're a small refiner, considered small in this huge industry, which we have, and we'll probably get into that some more, but being a small refiner, we're like 1/5 the size of an average refinery in our industry. So we are small, but we are also probably the smallest integrated refiner in the country as well. We do have crude production still in the Illinois basin. We do bring that and gather crude to our refinery down in Mount Vernon. And then we refine high quality products, diesel fuel, gasoline, asphalt are the primary products, a little bit of propane. And then we have a product pipeline that runs the state. So when we look at physical locations, we have 4 product terminals that we own. And then we also sell in a number of other product terminals. But we have a terminal, obviously, in Mount Vernon where the refinery is at, Swiss City, Indiana, and then Jolietteville, Indiana, which is just north of Indianapolis. And then we have a proprietary pipeline that continues on up to Peru, Indiana. So our footprint is over the entire state of Indiana. And we sell a lot of diesel fuel in the state. We think that we supply about 75% of the ag market in the state and over 50% of the school systems in the state. So even though we're kind of small, we're pretty big in the state of Indiana. As far as employees, we have about 500 employees, just under about 500 employees. Most of those are in Evansville, Mount Vernon area. But we do have our headquarters in Indianapolis, which is kind of central to the state and central to our members, where there's probably about 20, 25 people there. So,
great.
So that's I was listening, Matt, and you're using some terms that you know, I'm not familiar with. We use them, but we say things like refinery and goodness, you watch the news now, and I've never thought that a pipe could become political, but it seems like that. You know, we talk about pipelines. Where do you get the crude oil? That's just what it is. I mean, that just comes right out of the ground. So where do you source most of that? So the footprint, the geography.
No, that's a great question. So a lot of people don't realize that in southern Indiana, southern Illinois, western Kentucky, there is actually a crude oil production basin called the Illinois Basin, where crude was discovered back in the 30s. And it's been producing crude oil ever since, and it's local crude. And you're right, the crude oil comes out of the ground, and it is crude. You can't use it for pretty much anything, so you have to do something with it to get the products out of it. And how we get our crude is we gather it by truck in the Illinois Basin. We have a pipeline system. And actually, the pipeline systems, and you're right, they are political these days,
Somehow,
right?
I don't know.
Pipelines.
I'm mad at it.
What's not?
Well, that's
I know.
true, yeah.
Well, you can get in that. But pipelines are the safest ways to transport fuels. And there's thousands and thousands of miles of pipeline in our country that people just don't even realize. And crude products, natural gas, there's a lot of things that move via pipeline that just they're way more efficient, and they're actually way safer than putting crude oil on trucks where you can have traffic accidents. There's fuels that go by train, and we've heard of derailments and problems with that. So pipelines are actually very safe to have in the transport fuels. And we use those pipelines and try to be as efficient as we can to bring crude in from the Illinois basin by truck and then by pipe and bring it down to the refinery.
Well, how important, Matt, how important is that to have locally sourced energy that close to this area?
That's the one thing about being an integrated oil company and being, even though we're small, we are integrated, and we have local crude that we can purchase. And we purchase about 65 to 70% of all the production that's in the Illinois basin. Over time, our refinery has gotten bigger, and anytime you're producing anywhere oil is being produced, it's going to decline over time. So we actually process more crude than the Illinois basin can supply at this point. But we're tied into another pipeline system. There's a crude hub in Patoka, Illinois, which a lot of people haven't heard of Patoka, Illinois, but a lot of people have heard of Cushing, Oklahoma.
Yep.
So Cushing, Oklahoma is like a big crude center in this country. Well, Patoka, Illinois is like the crude center in the Midwest. And so being able to be attached to Patoka and then have that all via pipeline to get down to the refinery, we have a lot of optionality to bring crudes into the refinery, and it's very secure. And so in where we're located, one of the things being a supply cooperative, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but supply cooperative is about ensuring that you're always going to have supply. Yeah. And when there's problems like on the Gulf Coast with hurricanes and things like that, we're going to have supply. And it's actually kind of interesting is that even when I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people out in the field lately, and it's like when I mention that, it's like, well, no, if you're buying from CountryMark, we're going to have the diesel fuel for you. And so from a supply chain issue, we know we can have all the ins into the refinery, which is crude oil, and we know that we control the pipeline for the products in the distribution system that gets out to the state. So
I tell you that answered my next question. I remember it's a few years ago, and I won't mention the time or the event, but we were pretty concerned. We had a meeting scheduled up in Columbus, and I was like, I'm not really sure about the schedules and what we're supposed to be doing. And Harold Cooper, who's now the CEO, he's CEO of the Legacy Premier Ag at the time, he goes, come on, we got plenty of gas in the C-store, right? And it does feel good to have that assurance that we've got the local supply and refining capabilities.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that we talk about that, and there hasn't been many supply disruptions in our industry. It's just starting to happen again now, where you saw the problem with the Colonial Pipeline going up the East Coast, this last summer, and then what happened in Texas in February, and then the Hurricane Ida that came in through Louisiana. We're starting to see a lot more possibilities for disruptions in the supply chain, and we're prepared for that. CountryMark's prepared. I mean, we've positioned our company to be able to continue to be that reliable supplier of fuel for our members' business, and making sure that we have that. I mean, that's kind of just paramount to what we do, to make sure that we have it.
Well, that's good. Kudos to you. We actually had a meeting today with some staff, and we talked about supply issues and are we having trouble, and they're like, we are not, but some of our competitors certainly are. So hats off to CountryMark for keeping us well prepared. So as we own a gas station as Premier. We own a gas station and C-store on Interstate 69 in Southwest Indiana. A lot of days you will see as many cars in that parking lot without a state plates on as you will Indiana plates. And we've established that you're a cooperative, and I have had a lot of questions from folks saying, do I have to be a member of Country Mark or do I have to be a member of a cooperative to purchase gas from a facility where I see signage and or canopies that say Country Mark on them? Can you talk to that just a little bit? Because we don't have your only C-store.
No, that's right. No, Country Mark has about 120 canopies out, retail sites out in the state, in the surrounding states. And every time we talk to people, all of those sites, anybody can come and purchase from Country Mark. I mean, we have great quality fuels to be able to provide. I think one of the things is that as we've migrated to increase our retail presence over time, one of the things is that a lot of our older stations, we really started with a model that was unattended fuel sites. And so we have about 40% of our sites are unattended. And so people it's not a regular C-store. And it's kind of like, well, can I go buy gasoline there? And the answer is, well, yeah, they have, just like any other station where you can pull up to the pump and you can put your credit card in and you can go purchase fuel from your local cooperative. Okay. And then we've done a really good effort. In 2007, we kind of rebranded. I can't believe it's been that long, but we've really started to make an effort to try to push our brand presence out into the population. And we typically serve rural populations, and our roots are, agriculture and delivering fuel out to people. And so doing retail and having a retail presence out in the countryside, we continue to grow that. And I think it's making a lot of headway. And I think a lot of people, at least in rural areas, they know they can come buy from Country Mark. And I think the value of that too is that when they're buying from Country Mark, they're buying from one of our members, and it's all local. I mean, it's local. Gasoline and diesel is coming from our refinery in Mount Vernon, and all that money and what they're paying for and all that value, that goes back into the rural economy, and it goes back to our members and goes out through the countryside.
Stays local.
It stays local.
Yeah.
And so that is, I mean, I get chills even talking about it, because it's great to be able to talk in a venue like this, because even at times I don't even think about the impacts that we have, and to be able to go and have a company that is going from the ground, from the well, all the way down to serve the consumer, and to do that in rural America, and be able to and have that value for people, it's awesome.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Well, I'm going to change gears on you a little bit. So let's go to one of those stores in Brownstown, Indiana. We got a Country Mark store, and when you pull up to one of the pumps, you've got quite a selection of different product offerings, and a lot of, we think of crude, we don't think about renewable fuels. And tell us a little bit about some of your efforts about renewable fuels and what those look like.
Sure. Matter of fact, I've been to Brownstown, and I've bought unleaded 88 at Brownstown,
yep.
Which unleaded 88, that's one of the, I think it's 6 or 7 where we, stores where we have that product, which is a 15% ethanol blend. So you have, I go back, being farmer owned, and part of that, Country Mark has been supportive of renewable fuels ever since I've been here, for 20 years, long before there was any type of regulatory regime or anything like that. I think we went to blending 10% ethanol back in 2008 when we finally made it. I mean, 75% of our gasoline we were selling was a 10% blend then. So we started to blend that then. And also we started blending biodiesel, like soy-based biodiesel, back in 2005, 2006. And at one point, I think we had, at our terminals, we had 3 of the 12 direct rack injection systems for biodiesel in the country. So being a small company, having 3 of 12 in the entire country where you could rack inject biodiesel, I mean, we're on the leading edge of biodiesel in the fuel system.
And rack inject means what?
Yeah, the rack, that's great. I take all this stuff for granted.
Yeah.
Right? When you go to a terminal, and in a lot of places, You go pick up gasoline. When you see those gasoline transport trucks coming to your local gas station, they went and picked that up at a terminal. Okay. Well, when you go, there's some people that will go out and buy diesel fuel at a terminal, and then they will go and blend biodiesel, and what they call it is just splash blending, where someone will physically go and just throw some biodiesel on the top of the fuel that they just bought at a terminal.
Seems like it ought to be mixed up.
That's exactly right.
Right?
So they're using this mobile mixing technology. Yeah. They're using mobile mixing technology, so that's, they're just getting it and going to the fuel source. When I say direct rack injection, it's basically we're putting the biodiesel and blending it directly into the diesel fuel as it's going into the truck, and so it's well mixed. And all of that is part of the quality effort that we do. Make sure that our quality of diesel fuel and the biodiesel and any other additives that we put into the fuel are going to be well mixed into the product.
And I guess last thing I've got on the kind of a question on the bio and renewable fuels is they burn cleaner, right? They stretch our supply of crude longer with a renewable product, which is our crops that we grow. Correct?
No, those are all exactly right. The other thing too is, and this is kind of getting into some of the future. I mean, if you look at the future, and we may talk a little bit more about that again, but the world is wanting to decarbonize the world, okay? And so liquid fuels and that are probably, they're getting a bad name because everybody wants to go to electrification. I think renewable fuels and being able to blend biodiesels, renewable diesel, ethanol, those are things that are ways that we can help lower the carbon impact of our fuels, and not just stretch the supply, but hopefully contribute to the betterment of the world.
Sure. Great.
So.
Well, that's interesting. You kind of led into my next question, but there are threats to the crude oil industry. There are threats to what you do, the livelihood and the longevity of your business. But I would think that those threats also will affect the renewable fuel business as well. And a lot of that will be some of the questions that I'm getting ready to ask. But it seems like that everybody wants to pit renewables against crude. Truthfully, your threats are similar, if not the same, in many, many instances. So tell us a little bit about CAFE standards, which is probably a term that's unfamiliar. That's not how good the place is where you buy your coffee. Batteries. Elon Musk has tripled his net worth in the last year. He's flying to space, but he also sells cars that run on batteries. So tell us a little bit about those threats and why it's important for crude and renewables to be on the same page.
Yeah, I think well, let's take.
And I asked you 15 questions in one.
I'll try to
sort that out.
That's okay. I'll sort those out. That's right. Let's take CAFE standards. So CAFE standards are basically the miles per gallon on the fleet that car owners have or car manufacturers have to meet. Okay, and if they don't meet their standard on miles per gallon, they have to end up buying credits. Okay, so it's interesting that you talk about Elon Musk. Is that if you look at Tesla, and they're putting out a lot of vehicles, but and they're starting to make some money on their cars. But prior to that, they were making most of all their money on selling credits to the other automakers. These credits to make sure that they could meet their miles per gallon for their fleet.
Wow.
And so they were making like $500 million a quarter just on selling credits. And that's because of the standards that all automakers have to have from a fleet standpoint. Well, if you think about that, if that's how the standards are set, what they do is they favor electric vehicles in the calculation because they say that there's zero emissions, and I have quotes here, zero emissions. But electric vehicles are not zero emission by any means. They have zero tailpipe emissions, but when you go to charge the battery, you're charging it in wherever the electricity is being produced. In Indiana, we have a lot of coal-fired power plants. So you're basically charging that battery with coal, okay? Also, all the mining and the manufacturing to make those batteries, those have a lot of carbon footprint as well. And so when you look at the life cycle from the well to the wheel, so to speak, the internal combustion engine, which everybody wants to get rid of nowadays, it's just as good from a carbon intensity as a lot of electric vehicles, depending on where they're being used and manufactured. The other thing, so that threat, and it's really the threat is it's policy, and people think that electric vehicles are zero emissions when they're not zero emissions. I think liquid fuels people, you're right, is that it always seems like it's the renewable guys against the oil refiners, and we always are arguing about the renewable fuel standard and how much we should do and things like that. We've been advocating, CountryMark's been advocating for a number of years that, hey, one of the things that could help auto manufacturers make better efficiency cars, keep the internal combustion engine relevant in the future, is to change the gasoline standard on octane to go from where we're at today at 87 to a 95 octane. And what that would do, auto manufacturers could make higher or better efficiency cars. They could to help them meet their CAFE standards. They would put money into the research, and it would be good for the environment as well, because if we went to a higher octane standard for gasoline, the internal combustion engine would be more efficient to the point of putting about 700,000 electric vehicles on the road each year. And we only do 350,000 electric vehicles on the road now. That's how many get sold in this country. So this is like an immediate impact that could be helpful for the climate. It would also help with higher octane. Ethanol is a very good octane blending component. It would probably give growth to ethanol industry.
So you can raise the octane by adding ethanol.
You can.
Okay.
And so it would probably change how we have the fuel formulation going forward. And so it's an opportunity for rural America. It's also an opportunity to counterbalance the threat where everybody thinks we should go to electric.
Well, and that's shockingly, electricity is not produced by rainbows and unicorns. I mean, you've got to either mine some kind of products out of the ground to build the solar farms and take ground out of production, unfortunately. And that's people don't understand, when you put in a solar farm, that ground's gone forever.
Right.
And there's no coming back once that soil's disturbed, and you put solar panels all over that. It's just gone forever.
Well, that's a worry. That's a worry for me, just from so I'm an engineer, so don't hold that against me. But when I look at these are like engineering problems, and I think people get into the fine details, and no one's taken a step back to look at it. It's very complex. No matter how you think of climate change and where the world is going, it's a lot more complex than just, hey, let's go to electricity. I worry about where, we're taking good agricultural land and turn them into solar farms. At the same time, in the next 30 years, we're going to have 2 billion more people on this world. And so it's like and there's only so much good cropland in the world.
Yep.
And so, to have that delicate balance to make sure that we can feed the population and do what's right for humanity is important.
Well, we've kind of circled in and out of it, but from a regulation standpoint, obviously it's a major part of all businesses. Refining would be challenged by, I assume, as many regulations as probably anyone is. We've talked about you being small, and you give your size relative to others, but you live in a world of giants, the Shells, the Exxon Mobils, and whatever. But it's interesting to me, CountryMark is all the way on Capitol Hill. Very influential on Capitol Hill when decisions are being made. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about I have an amicus from the Supreme Court that you're named in. That's fantastic as you talk about your size.
Yeah, it's my predecessor, I'll give him a lot of credit that he saw the realization that we need to get involved in Washington and at the state level. So I think we've been doing that for well over 12, 15 years, where we ended up having a presence and really building the rapport in Washington, D.C., where we go and say, hey, there's a company called CountryMark out here. We're not big oil. We're a small refiner. We are farmer owned. We look at it, we're kind of like the apple pie of the industry, because we got a nice little company, and there's regulatory stuff that come out, and we talk about it internally as like we're kind of the canary in the coal mine. And so if it's bad for CountryMark, it's going to be bad for the industry. And so we've done a lot to make sure that people know who we are in Washington. We've had the opportunity to testify multiple times on Capitol Hill. And so we do have some influence on what's happening. And now, and also in our industry group, the American Refiners and Manufacturers, American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers, AFPM, we actually participate in that organization. We're at the executive committee level for that organization. So like you said, with Marathon, Exxon, all these big companies, we get to influence where our industry is actually going. And that's a benefit to be able to do that, and to be a small refiner and have that influence is pretty positive. And then you mentioned we're big supporters of renewable fuels, and we've talked about that already. But at the other side, we're also a small refiner, and even though we blend as much ethanol and biodiesel that we cannot meet our obligation under the renewable fuel standard. We can only blend about 55% of our obligation. So we have to buy credits for, just like the automakers got to buy their credits, we got to buy credits to meet our obligation. There's a way for small refiners to get an exemption from the renewable fuel standard if you have disproportionate economic hardship. This is not, it's there to not necessarily to say, oh, give you a pass on not blending renewable fuels, but if it's economically hard on a small refiner, you get financial relief. And we've applied for those, and we've gotten a few of them. And then there was a bunch of court rulings and things like that basically said small refiners can't get an exemption. And Ryan, you mentioned the amicus brief where CountryMark, we put in a couple briefs in support of a case that actually got to the Supreme Court. And people don't realize that the Supreme Court only takes up about 2% of the cases that even come before the court. And actually 4 justices they have to approve that they want to hear the case. So even to be able to get that to the Supreme Court was a big thing. And then in the Supreme Court, they basically ruled in the favor of small refiners, that we can continue to get exemptions if we prove the disproportionate economic hardship. And right now, from a CountryMark standpoint, we're seeing huge numbers that this costs our company. And being a cooperative, to me, when we make money, CountryMark makes money, we're able to give patronage refunds back to our membership. And so if we make money, everybody makes money, and that money goes out into the countryside of Indiana and goes out to our members. And when you have a regulatory regime that has not been hasn't been well run from the government standpoint. I mean, we don't even know how much renewable fuels we're supposed to blend for this year yet. They haven't even told us what the rules are. And so when you have uncertainty with that, and then it's also a big financial penalty, I mean, obviously we got to look and see where we can get some relief.
Yeah, these the regulations, it's kind of like trying to swat flies with 2x4s. And I mean, it's just, and the idea that we've got some regulations out there that we have a a local area where we're sourcing energy that's owned by. We described the ownership that it goes back in the communities, and the refineries here, and it's just it's with those regulations just make it unfair. It takes the playing field completely out, and it's disproportionately penalizes the smaller refineries, which you said was 1/5 the size of
an average one.
Yeah, exactly.
We're a couple of orders of magnitude smaller than the other refinery that's in the state.
So who establishes that it's disproportional hardship? Do you get to tell them that when you see your bottom line? You say this is disproportional.
No, actually, so it's a little bit more complex than that, but we have to go and fill out a bunch of information, and it really comes down to our production. And the bottom line for CountryMark is, and what happens is that the EPA takes our application, they send it to the DOE. The DOE has some metrics that they go and measure whether you're disproportionate or you have disproportionate economic hardship or not. One of the big things that CountryMark will always be disadvantaged is that we're a diesel-centric company. And so we primarily try to produce as much diesel fuel as we can. And so we produce probably 45% of the crude, our yields is diesel fuel, which is high compared to other refiners that are trying to make gasoline. Well, our obligation, we have to blend over 10% renewable fuels. Well, it's 10% into gasoline and to diesel fuel. And so gasoline, we can blend 10% ethanol, and we're trying to push to have more unleaded 88 and E15, 15% ethanol blends and stuff like that to grow that part of the business. But to go and blend 10% biodiesel, that's not really the standard. I mean, I think nationwide we average about 5% totally. And so so we're always under the gun.
Yep.
And it's because we're manufacturing diesel fuel on purpose, because our members, we sell all of our diesel fuel goes through our member network, and our members' business is diesel centric. We sell about 40% of our gasoline through our member network, and the other part of it goes out on the open market. So we don't have the opportunity to blend as much renewable fuel.
Yeah.
And so that's just the biggest piece, and that's not going to change. That's structural to who we are as a cooperative system.
Well, I tell you, I don't know about Ryan, but Matt, I feel like I have more questions. And we've talked about the impact on the Indiana economy and just the amount of CountryMark diesel that's going through agriculture and through municipalities. So where can we go find more information? Well, is there some places where now I'm curious, and some of our listeners and podcast, the thousands and millions of listeners that are watching us, where can we find more information?
I told him we were live in 67 states.
Well, the best place is, if you want to go and get information on where you can get CountryMark fuels, you can always go to countrymark.com, and you can go and look at our fuels, and it will show you and give you contact information for all of our local cooperative partners. Obviously, if you're a customer of Premier, then you know who to call to get your fuel, and they're going to sell CountryMark fuel, and it's going to be the high quality fuel and all that. But yeah, they can go to the website, and you're right. It is local. I sit there and I think about all the jobs. I mean, we have 500 employees, and they get paid very well. But just over the years since I've been here, I talked about the patronage refunds. When we make money, we've been able to go and just on returns alone distribute over $300 million over the last 15 years to our member companies.
Back to your owners, which goes back to the exactly.
That's right. And just on that, and then when I look at just the economic activity, where we're buying about $1 billion worth of crude every year, and we're selling about $1 billion worth of products, and we have a lot of people in the Country Mark cooperative system that distribute and sell our fuels. It's all of those jobs, and everybody that's working as part of our retail network, so to speak, and that selling the Country Mark brand. It's a big thing for Indiana.
Yeah, I've heard it described that that the Indiana cooperative system is likely the most successful cooperative system in the nation, and a lot of that is due straight back to the fact that we own our own refinery. That is something that has added years of longevity and success to the Indiana cooperative system. So,
and I guess if you're a listener on the east or west coast, and Matt said something there about how the gas goes through a pipe, goes to a terminal, which is then picked up and goes to a gas station, and so that there's a whole process there of things that have to happen in logistics and supply and in operations where you came from. That it's remarkable that it gets to us at the end.
It is remarkable to go and figure out how many people, just Country Mark being a small company in a huge industry, to know that like the Illinois Basin employs like 20,000 people, and that's a small oil basin. And so you look at all of that and how many people are involved in our industry, and just from a Country Mark standpoint, but in this country, we use 9.5 million barrels a day of gasoline and about 5 million barrels of diesel a day. So multiply a barrel times 42, and that's how much liquid fuels we're using as a nation, which is it's just the scale of our industry and the economic impact, and being able to do what we do with the products that we make is amazing.
Well, it moves our food. It moves everything we take for granted. Everything, the coffee we drink in the morning to the food in the restaurants to the clothing, everything moves by road or rail or gets floated on the water.
No, you're exactly right, and it all takes diesel fuel. So,
yeah.
And that's why we always worry about, we talked about electric cars, and electric cars are about getting rid of gasoline. Well, you can't make diesel fuel without making some gasoline.
See that? Yeah, I'm not sure everybody realizes
we need
that.
We need to get into that at some point in time, and we can do it today. I don't care.
No,
but when you talk about barrels and how many gallons and what's in a barrel of crude oil and how you push product through a pipeline, it's all fascinating without getting too detailed.
I can always come back and talk with you guys.
That sounds like a good plan.
I love it. Yeah,
because it is crazy. It's crazy big, but yeah, you're right. I mean, if you just, like I said, crude oil has gasoline in it and it has diesel fuel in it. And we're going to need diesel fuel for a long time, because you're right. It moves everything. It moves the dirt. It grows crops. It trains, planes, trucks, transport. You talk about having a supply chain problem right now because we can't have drivers that are going to drive trucks that are running on diesel fuel. That's not going to change in the near future.
No.
And so
it is not. It is not. And you make asphalt, you have a derivative of propane even. Yeah. So there's a lot to what you do, and we will delve into that. We hope you do come back. We hope you come back and spend more time with us, because I know that our listeners are going to gain a substantial amount of knowledge from this and appreciation for the Country Mark. They may not be familiar with it as they see the blue signs running down the interstate, but they need to be and understand what they're supporting and who they're supporting and where that money is staying. And I do appreciate your time. Sal, you have anything else for him?
No, I do, but we won't have time today. We're going to get into the next session.
I appreciate it, and like I said, more than it'd be fun to come back for sure.
All right, well, we have Matt Smorch, CEO and President of Country Mark, with us on this episode of The High Ground, powered by Premier Companies. And Sal, with that, I think we'll wrap this episode up.
All right, thanks, Matt.
Thank you.